Good morning, everybody, and welcome along to another episode of Beyond Bitcoin. Today, we're focusing on markets. So we're going to be talking about the Bitcoin ETFs, the amount of tokens that are sitting on exchanges or not sitting on exchanges, what's happening with artificial intelligence, what's happening in markets, the altcoin, and where there's a lag in that. And today, speaking with us today and joining us, of course, is Greg Galton. And Greg Galton has 25 years as an analyst, so absolute discipline in the space, which is interesting to bring to this market, and 5 years of that in the area of crypto and tokenomics. And of course, my friend and colleague, as normal, Nitin Gaur is joining us today. So may I throw straight over to you, Greg, what's happening in the marketplace?
Good morning, Derek. Yes, well, the market had, as we know, had a fairly good run in May. A little bit softer this month to start off the month. I think the macro environment is not quite so conducive. Expectations of the Fed sort of pushing back their rate cuts has meant that the market had an initial dip and then has gone sideways since. But sort of Bitcoin holding around at 69,000 level. I think there's a lot of whales that are sitting there with buy orders at 69,000. So that's certainly holding the Bitcoin price up in the short term. We've also had some very, very good flows into the Bitcoin ETFs. I think $2.3 billion over the last month, including one day was over $850 million worth. So still some very, very good flows into Bitcoin. And that's really sort of Bitcoin. I think it's still Bitcoin season. It's not yet alt season, but we'll sort of touch on that a little bit later on.
Sure. And something to add to that, Derek, is that on a macro front, ECB and Bank of Canada have cut rates, and the whole US has its own rhythm, and it's widely expected in an election year that to cut the rates and bring back the risk on, risk off narrative and inflows into crypto assets as liquidity eases in the system. What's interesting also, Derek, is that the Wall Street Journal did talk about asset pricing and overvalued equity markets. And I think that the investors are trying to figure out the alternative investment beyond the traditional alts, the private equity, the private credits, and the overall private markets. Crypto seemed to benefit from that momentum, and all the inflows that Greg talked about is a reflection of that momentum flowing into the investment instrument. So yeah, super interesting sort of week per se, and yeah.
So very much so, Nitin. And what we always see is the macro does greatly influence the micro in this space. And although we hope in due course that we'll see a sort of decoupling of this space to a degree as it rapidly grows as an industry, it is still very correlated with the availability of liquidity. Nitin, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that what's interesting, which is what Greg mentioned, that it's still a Bitcoin momentum. We've seen two things. One is a massive influx of layer 2 and DeFi protocols, which is really meant to increase the overall Bitcoin as a liquidity and a security mechanism. But what's also interesting is that with this inflow, we've seen the entire ETF class reach to 15.7 billion. The nearest thing that reached so fast was a JP Morgan ETF, which took about 3 years. What the Bitcoin ETF has achieved in the last, I would say, 6 to 7 months, which I think is still an achievement in its own accord.
Yeah, extraordinary. Are we ever going to head towards an alt season, Greg?
I think we will, Derek. That's the way that the market cycles have played out every time since every respective Bitcoin halving. As I said, as we said at the time during the Bitcoin halving, the Bitcoin price action was a little bit different this time around in terms of hitting a new all-time high ahead of the halving. But I think we've seen this sort of a little bit of period of weakness post the halving, which is consistent with the last 2 cycles actually. And I think the key for me is really with Ethereum. That was up 28% in the month of May after the ETF was approved. We're still waiting on the SEC to go through the S1 filings in terms of getting a launch date for the Ethereum ETF. But look, I think that there's going to be a very similar increase in liquidity into the Ethereum ETFs, nowhere near the scale of Bitcoin, but let's say it's 10 to 20% of that. It's still a significant amount of buying pressure in ETH. You've got BlackRock who've already started seeding their ETF. They've bought $10 million worth of ETH and they're staking it already, which is interesting. So I think that will be the increase in performance of ETH relative to BTC will signal the start of alt season, and then it'll flow on from there into the other larger altcoins, the likes of Solana. There's still sort of talk and rumors about Solana being the next cab on the block to get an ETF potentially. I think Trump's made some positive noises about that, so it's keep our fingers crossed in terms of what happens there. But everything seems to be sitting together nicely for towards the end of the year and into next year for a pretty good bull market run in the crypto markets.
Yeah.
The market's
and one thing, Greg, just to add on to that from consensus, which was last week, we've always considered Bitcoin and Ethereum as structural assets. They represent, one is basically a smart contract platform, one is basically a monetary system. And now you begin to see Solana as a third sort of nearest ecosystem. So Solana has a massive growth. It's sort of surpassed Ethereum ecosystem. But what's interesting, as you mentioned this, Greg, is that the overall crypto investment products took on nearly 2 billion, as we know, this week. And there's an expectation that Ether-tracked products will eventually reach the price target of 10,000 by end of 2024, which is almost 200% increase that we are looking into this. And I think a part of that whole element is around the growth of alt, which is either built on Ethereum or Ethereum linking to the other sort of alt ecosystem, which is built on Solana, for example. So I think, but I'll pause here to get your reaction on that as well.
Greg.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you look at the volume in meme coins that we're seeing at the moment, I mean, that's an interesting part of the market. We won't sort of go into the fundamentals of meme coins, but look at the amount of liquidity that's coming into that part of the market. That's a little bit concerning to me, because there's a lot more tokens this time around for this bull market than there was the last two times. There's however many, there's 23,000 tokens a day being created on Solana, right, on meme coins, which means that it's spreading that available liquidity or that capital across a much wider base. Now, I don't think the 10th derivative of a dog coin is going to give you the same returns of Dogecoin, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. But I think you're right. I think, the growth in Ethereum is still very much unfettered. The layer twos coming in, you are seeing a pickup in the TV in total value locked on a lot of the layer twos. They're all sort of continued to generate fees, but they've been incredibly efficient post that Dencun update. It's been so much easier and cheaper to transact on the layer twos recently. So I think you're seeing a shift. You're seeing a shift back into the ETH ecosystem as well, which is interesting, in addition to that growth in Solana. So they're kind of, they're not neck and neck yet, but in terms of market cap, but they're certainly, performing pretty well. And hopefully that's, that the performance of those two above Bitcoin will signal the start of alt season. Yeah. So don't ask me for a timing on that. I'm thinking August, September, but that's only a bit of a guess at this stage.
And that kind of makes sense, that it is that. We've seen traditionally that last quarter of the year, second half of the year and last quarter of the year, the periods of time that the crypto markets tend to come alive, which is intriguing. There's no guarantee of that, but if you look at the past graphs, that's often reflected in that. The statement around meme coins is interesting. I just want everyone to know that Australia now has a kangaroo with hat, apparently, token. So that's a very important thing. So we've joined the crowd. So whether it's kangaroo with hat, cat that's very angry, or whatever it happens to be, it's just an interesting space where people are gambling and playing. I don't believe, it shouldn't represent a dent to the brand. It's a sector that is getting played with, and we need to put it in perspective. The volumes might be interested in the turnover. I don't know what they are, but in regards to capitalization, it's still about $55 billion, and so therefore it's sub 3% of the market capitalization. So it's a very small part of the capitalization. Greg, we talked a little bit before. Is there any logic in the progression when altcoins start to become invested in, that the kind of more peripheral sectors will start rolling through next? And I used, metaverse and gaming as examples. And you put a logical statement in, and that is that you had a feeling that metaverse at that stage had its run, and that gaming was more interesting. So it's not just a sequence of, now we're in DeFi, we should now look at these alternatives along the way. What are your thoughts about that, Greg? And then you, Nitin.
I think it's about picking the right narrative in the crypto markets. And look, that's kind of all we really have to go on, because we don't have fundamental valuations for these protocols. It's really it's price action and it's narrative. And to me, the metaverse narrative, that's kind of from that's last cycle. I really don't see that getting a lot of momentum again. We're not hearing the likes of Meta sort of talking about it. We're not, the whole, it's just, there still will be fine. I know one of the protocols recently raised some more money, so they're still trying to continue to grow, but the investor attention is not there. Definitely gaming, gaming is an area that I see huge potential for, to bring onto the blockchain, and we're just waiting for that AAA rated game to hit, and sort of that will be the big inflection point for gaming. It's impossible to predict when that will happen, but there's a number of chains that are sort of already there, the likes of Immutable X, the likes of Ronin, that are trying to set themselves up as pure gaming blockchains. And I think that's a very interesting area. Rather than trying to pick the game, you try and pick the gaming infrastructure. And then on top of that, look, AI, that's been a huge narrative since the start of the year. There's been a lot of profit taking in the sector recently. There was some concern about a new token. I won't mention the name, but there was some concerns about the actual number of GPUs that this AI protocol actually had in the background, and just ahead of launch. And I note that the CEO has actually just resigned today or overnight. So there's been some concerns about this massive growth in AI is putting a lot of pressure, a lot of demand on the available GPUs, and whether that has an impact on the blockchain protocol. So that's another interesting narrative. We still think that has room to play out, but as always with crypto, it's a rocky road, it's volatile, and as we always say, it's the volatility is a feature, not a bug.
100% agree, Greg. And I think one thing which also was at consensus, the conversation, that I think the narrative behind gaming and identity are something which is understood by the entire industry. We know that gaming actually provides utility. It's much needed. There are a lot of walled gardens in the gaming ecosystem, but it's been the hardest to penetrate from crypto perspective. And there are many reasons for that, because there are game developers who are protective of their IP. And whenever you begin to be protective of the IP, it becomes very hard to go and decentralize that ecosystem. So there's a massive challenge. It's more of a commercial challenge, I think, Greg, where there is an understanding that we need to fix it, but it's very hard to debate between true decentralization and ability for them to be able to move the value from one ecosystem to another ecosystem, because all game developers are quite protective of what they're building per se. Same with identity. I think there's a normal understanding, and there've been a lot of alliances between, let's say, the likes of Unstoppable Domains, who's giving you a DNS-like capability and giving you wallets. Coinbase has done the same thing, and they have partnered with the likes of Animoca Brands and Sandbox as some of the ecosystems, but it's still not gotten to the point of what meme stocks or what the kangaroos and the monkeys and the dogs have done for the meme ecosystem. And I'll say one more thing on AI. I spent a lot of time trying to understand the computational overhead. Like, why do we need AI, and what is the element of whether you're looking at data modeling or using as some of the model selection process that goes into AI, and accessibility to GPUs. And I'll tell you this, there's a mismatch, and you pointed out rightly, Greg, there's a mismatch between availability of computational power and the utility of using these data and models. There's a lot of narrative, but I think the utility of a true AI in decentralized world is still lacking. So I think, and you hear headlines from what happened with Apple and the growth of some of the AI stocks or AI sort of tokens, but that is just a narrative. It has not translated from narrative to utility. So I'll pause there and get your reactions, guys.
Greg.
I think that's all. Those are all very valid points, Nitin, and I think that's some of the weakness that we're seeing in the market at the moment. So some people are sort of viewing that as a buying opportunity, and it's trying to. I guess ultimately it goes back to picking the right narrative and really sort of focusing on that, and then looking at the best infrastructure plays within that particular narrative. So that's an ongoing process that we go through, and we'll continue to do so.
And Greg, any particular token that's been of interest in the last 30 days since we've last caught up on Beyond Bitcoin talking about the marketplace?
Yeah, there's been some interesting announcements coming through. Arweave, AR, they're sort of talking about AI. They've introduced this AO protocol that's built atop their permanent data storage layer. that can run parallel applications and maintain network states locally. They're going to look at a 100% fair launch, no pre-sale, and a 21 million token supply. So that's launching on June 13th, so probably just after this podcast comes out. But that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. You also had, with Chainlink, you had the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. That's the world's largest securities settlement system, which processes 3 quadrillion in securities in 2023. They did a successful pilot in collaboration with Chainlink. So you saw Chainlink, I think, was up about 40% in the month of May on the back of that. So there's been quite a bit of positive news around. Plus, I think a number of Ethereum-based tokens have done well since the ETH ETF announcement, including some that I think don't deserve to be re-rated, like Ethereum Classic. The only reason that is up is because Bitcoin Cash was up on the Bitcoin ETF approval, and I don't see any follow through into Ethereum Classic. But anyhow, that's the market's take on things at the moment. It's not necessarily always right curve. Sometimes the market's a bit left curve as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting, when we talk about Radiance, which is the actively managed multi-strategy fund, we are interested in Ethereum Classic, but for the opposite reason. And that is that the Ethereum Classic, we do not think has longevity. So therefore, we're of the view that generation of income or protection can be had by it likely to perform far less than other tokens on the way through. So we'll often discuss tokens that we aren't impressed with because they may play a role in our portfolio, interesting enough. And so, okay, so we're coming to the end of our short brief on it. Our goal always is this once a month is going to be getting as much information across as we can, where our focus is. I think it's fair to say, both of you guys, that the market's gone sideways for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but it's fascinating when you see indicators such as BTCs getting taken off the exchange, ETH getting taken off exchanges, and the very low numbers that are sitting there. These are, and the whales having long positions at 69,000 US dollars. I think we're sitting above 70 at the moment. These are great indicators that the market is, at the moment, likely to have a movement towards the upside. As my 98-year-old father occasionally says to me, well, it's going in 3 directions, isn't it? And I said, yes, it is. It's either going up, down, or sideways. That's this market.
That is certainly wise, Derek. No, all good. Looking forward to next week. I'm hoping we have some interesting developments, especially my focus has been the liquid restaking tokens and some of the massive investments that the alt layer has seen this week and the Bitcoin sort of staking protocol. So I'm looking for some of the nuggets there, Derek.
Terrific. Excellent. And Greg, of course, you've got a constant focus right across the marketplace, from Kangaroo with Hat all the way through to Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, I've been following the mother token this week, Derek, which is a meme coin from Iggy Azalea. One of many celebrities that have launched. And unlike some of the other celebrities, he actually seems to know a little bit about the blockchain. And she's been on Spaces and interacting with the community. So it's been great to see. Nice to see some celebrities coming on and not looking to rug pull investors, which is, was a pleasant change.
We don't know that yet.
We don't know that yet. It's the day she hasn't, but yeah.
We hope it is, certainly with a name like Mother. Terrific. Look forward to seeing you guys next week along the way. And thanks very much. May the crypto market go strong.
Bye, guys.
Bye for now.
Upwards. Yeah.
Upwards.
Hey,
Bye.
guys.